You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and it is time for the final time this season, one day early, because obviously there's no Monday Night Football matchup with the 2024 regular season in the books. We are diving into power rankings, going through the tier list, worst to first, ranking all these teams in order as we get set for the playoffs. And yes, this is the last power rankings of the season that I will do. I always end them off at the regular season. I don't just rank the final teams as we go through the playoffs. That never really made sense to me. So we will wrap it up here, especially with the way we're doing the tier list. It wouldn't really make a bunch of sense to do so, considering the top two tiers basically have to do with who's going to make the playoffs or who I think is a contender for a championship and who's not. So I want you all to comment down below. Let me hear from you all one final time. Fire away. How are you ranking these teams? What am I getting right? What am I getting wrong? We are coming off the heels of a wild Sunday altogether, but an insane ending that I don't think anyone really expected from Sunday Night Football, with the Vikings getting absolutely stomped out by the Lions. I want to hear from you all, and also just kind of share. If you've been around for a while, I want to hear from you all. What did you think of the tier list style of power rankings we did this season? Obviously a little bit of a different flavor to power rankings here, but I kind of liked it because it made me think a little bit harder about where I was putting teams, and it also helped me kind of visualize where I thought about everyone in the NFL. When you just go 1 to 32, it's kind of really hard to grasp the difference between teams, between like when you're looking at 26 and 21 and what differentiates those teams from each other. I like the tier list because it kind of helped me see it a little bit better personally, but just curious to all hear your thoughts. But we will reset the board. Last week's rankings are on the screen right now. Flipping it over now one final time with the number one overall contenders category. Obviously, this doesn't match the actual draft order, but these are the bottom of the barrel teams, the teams that were competing for that number one spot in the draft. At number 32, the Cleveland Browns claim the number one spot with an ugly performance on Saturday. We have the Patriots at 31, the Giants at 30, the Titans at 29, the Jaguars at 28, and then the Bears rounding out the group at number 27. The Browns, we basically got exactly what I expected from a Bailey Zappi-led Browns offense here. I actually called the exact score of this game, 35-10 for Baltimore. Offense looked flat. Zappi is unfortunately a backup at best, I guess you could say, for him. The defense just kind of looked dejected and just was outright ready for this year to be done. A defense that's been carrying an offense for the better part of, I would say, about 3 years at this point now. So rightfully so, I would add on top of that. It was never even really close, even when the score was close in the early going of the game. And now we sit here with just an interesting scenario of what the Browns opt to do as far as the quarterback position goes. We saw the contract restructure with Deshaun Watson. Who knows what that actually means for the future of the franchise? If it means another season of Watson as QB1, Cleveland fans, if you decide to just sell your fandom card off, I don't even blame you if that's the case, but I'll be very interested in seeing where this Browns team goes from here. At 31, the New England Patriots. You obviously play to win, but this was a situation where the Patriots were better off losing a game than they were winning a game. And the question for me coming out of this really comes down to, did Jerod Mayo know going into this game what was going to happen? Because that happened so quickly after. Once post-game stuff was wrapped up and because again, I work in New England sports media here, so the people that I'm in contact with that were literally in the locker rooms telling me as soon as everyone was finally let go from post-game press conferences, removed from the locker rooms, the announcement was then dropped there. So, and I mean, there was an entire lengthy written statement put together for the social media team of the Patriots as well. Obviously, if you saw the statement from Robert Kraft, I'm just curious how soon, or not how soon, but just how recently Jerod Mayo actually found out that he was going to be fired, because he looked dejected, very unhappy, even got a little bit snippy with the media, and I think fairly so with all the shots he's been getting shot at him throughout the entirety of the season. But at this point, it's a quest for a new head coach. Was this win a middle finger to the Patriots and Robert Kraft on his way out by Gerard Mayo? Did Mayo even want to win this game? I don't really know, but this is a mixed bag altogether, and now sights are set on a new head coach and picking at number 4 overall, and it sounds like Mike Vrabel's the guy that the Patriots want. I don't know if that's the answer. I don't know if maybe chasing a Ben Johnson is maybe the better route to go down, but I am very much looking forward to seeing what the Patriots do, because this is the first time I will experience a, I guess, true Patriots head coaching search in my lifetime, because I was too young to see the actual Bill Belichick stuff unfold when it happened. I was not really watching football at, I think, 5 years old or however old I was at the time. So very interested to see how that all works itself out. The Giants at 30, sitting at 3-14. Drew Lock taking a massive crash back down to earth versus a Philadelphia second string and maybe even third string defense with all the guys they had out for this game. Offense managed just 13 points facing those backups, though. Wan'Dale Robinson had one of the wackier stat lines I've ever seen, 10 receptions for 43 yards. I mean, that's just an odd number to get at when you have so many receptions, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what the Giants wind up doing at the number 3 spot in the draft as well. This is a team that desperately needs to move on at quarterback, and they're finally getting to do so this year after years and years of the Daniel Jones experiment. And I'm curious, is it a guy like Cam Ward? Is it Shedeur Sanders? Do they maybe opt to chase after a different quarterback who might potentially hit the free agent market? There's a lot of options available at the Giants' hands, so I'm excited to see what they do. Titans at 29, they actually locked themselves up the number 1 overall pick, but in my eyes, they are not the worst team in the NFL. I think they just found themselves in a really good spot because of the way strength of schedule broke itself down, and also the Patriots finding a way to blow their opportunity at the number 1 pick, and the Giants, for whatever reason, deciding that they wanted to drop a season high in scoring and basically double their point total at the very highest in that game against Indianapolis. So they just kind of found themselves in the just bad enough to be in that position, but I would argue that the Titans, considering they beat the Patriots, and I would probably trust the Titans to maybe take down a team like the Browns or like the Giants, that I don't know if I'd put them at the very bottom, even though they are picking at number 1 here. CJ Stroud basically marched on them that first drive. You had the 92 touchdown run allowed, though. I mean, they did look every single part of a bottom 5 team. This is another one that this team needs a new quarterback. They've been working through the motions at the quarterback position for quite some time, going from Mariota to Tannehill, and then Tannehill, Will Levis saga to Will Levis, Mason Rudolph this year. It's been a weird one at quarterback for the Titans for quite some time now, so I'm interested to see where they opt to go next year, whether, again, it's with that number 1 pick in taking a quarterback, or maybe do they enter a Sam Darnold sweepstakes or trade for a J.J. McCarthy if the Vikings decide to stick with one or the other? Like, there's, again, a lot of options to kind of work through going through this offseason here, and plenty of time to fall in love with a potential draft pick in a quarterback. The Jaguars at 28. I feel like that catch fumble for 6 that happened during this game here was like a prime example of what this Jacksonville Jaguars team it was all about this year, just stumbling through certain situations, and ultimately you have Mac Jones leading this team at the end of the year, and he's doing his Mac Jones things where he's underthrowing deep balls, throwing them for interceptions. I mean, this is a team that if you would have told me that this was going to be the end result, and the question that I posed at the beginning of the season was obviously, were they the team that we saw at the end of last season or the team at the beginning of that last season? I posed the question, we were going to find out, and we certainly found out what this team's really all about. I don't really know if a head coaching change is going to do too much for this team. There's clearly a lot more holes on this roster than maybe we all realize. And obviously, taking care of the health of Trevor Lawrence is something that I don't really feel like the Jaguars have done a very good job of the last couple seasons. So that's also something we need to look at here. But I think we need more than just a head coaching change. But Doug Peterson's even acknowledged as such that this could have been his last game for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So again, another one that's just very interested in where they end up going here. That's kind of how I feel about these teams. Is I'm looking forward to the future now and seeing what happens with them all. And then the Bears rounding out the group at 5-12. This is a long time coming, about 2.5 months to be exact at this point here, going through that 10-game losing streak. Nearly gave it up too with that fumble late in the game that ultimately led to a go-ahead field goal by the Green Bay Packers. But getting the ball back, being able to play spoiler, and obviously, you're going up against a Packers team that lost Christian Watson in this game, and Jordan Love had to exit as well due to precautionary reasons. Once he went down with an injury, Green Bay was like, if we lose this game, we'll play who we have to play in the playoffs. I get that. I completely get that. So, but the fact being, you get to play spoiler, prevent the Packers from potentially improving on their seeding in here, which ultimately did not really end up mattering anyways because the Commanders wound up winning their football game. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, the Commanders had the tiebreaker. I could be wrong on that. I've been looking at way too many tiebreakers as of late. But the Bears playing spoiler, getting one final win to wrap up what has been just a disaster of a season. We saw a history-making move and a firing of a head coach. There's a lot of really good pieces in play here, though, and I think that with a regime shift and ultimately whatever happens at head coach will dictate what we see as far as what happens to the front office as well, because there's apparently a lot more unhappiness, I guess you could say, with the job that Ryan Poles has done than I actually even realized. And I'm sure some other people maybe realize here, because speaking with some Bears fans that I actually know personally, there seems to be a lot more unhappiness with what he's done as a GM on top of that. So maybe a full-blown reset, head coaching, coaching staff and front office altogether would maybe do good for this Bears team. But there are the pieces, at least on the roster, that you can look at and go, all right, we can work with this for who, and it's an attractive offer for an offensive-minded guy like a Ben Johnson, or maybe Mike Vrabel if he opts to maybe say, sorry, Patriots, you should have took me last year instead of handing the job to Gerard Mayo, and he opts to go to Chicago, because he kind of fits the Chicago theme. Like, when I think of rough and tough Chicago, I also feel like I could think of Mike Vrabel coaching there as well. So, again, a team that out of the bottom of the bunch have a lot to work with, and I would argue is probably the most attractive of these bottom teams right now going forward. And it kind of shows in the 5 wins they have. The next group we're going to look at here is going to be the struggle bus category. The teams that are just a little bit better. The Saints at 26, Raiders at 25, the Jets at 24, Panthers at 23, the 49ers sitting at 22, Cowboys at 21, and the Colts, despite being 8-9 and having that best record in this category amongst the teams, I have them lumped in here as well. We'll talk about that when we get to those Colts. But the Saints, injury-riddled season, one of those years that you're probably glad it's finally coming to an end. If you're a Saints fan, if you're a Saints player, if you're involved with the Saints organization, you're probably ready for this offseason. For me, I am genuinely hoping that this is the reset year that the Saints have kind of desperately needed for quite some time. If you're new to the channel, I have been talking about this for a while now. This is the reset year that I personally think the Saints should have just kind of went on after Drew Brees retired. Rather than trying to just take what you have, add these lucrative, not lucrative, but just adding these wild extensions with all these fake void years, kicking the can down the road, where you're going into every offseason $100 million and some change over the cap, and you basically are just cutting the fat and trimming down your roster every season and trying to field a playoff team. This is the reset year. You move on from everything from the Sean Payton / Drew Brees era of the Saints, move past it, you can cherish it, but it's time to flip the page completely here. I'm expecting a departure of Derek Carr and maybe a handful of some of those key players from years past. Maybe you keep Cam Jordan around, but I mean, there's as far as older veterans go, but this is a team that I think really needs to turn the page and start looking forward. The Raiders at 25, I have them higher than a team like the Saints or the Chicago Bears, because this is a team that got dealt with some tough blows injury-wise, but in my opinion, with how good Brock Bowers looked this year and how great of a complimentary piece Jacoby Myers is to Brock Bowers that we've seen, if we could just get a solid rushing attack going for this team and a actual quarterback under center who is, average to above average in the NFL, this is a Raiders team that I think could compete and could give some teams some problems. I'm not even so sure that firing Antonio Pierce is the right call here. I know there's probably a lot of people out there that are invested in the Raiders that think they probably have to move on from him, and I wouldn't be shocked to see that. I'm not saying don't fire him. I'm not saying to fire him. I'm just saying I don't necessarily know if that is the solution here. I think there's just a few key pieces that this team is missing. There's some stuff on the defense that maybe needs some work as well, but there are some early unfortunate injuries this team has been dealt with this year that I think really held back what they could have been. Like if you didn't lose a guy like Kuntz or Crosby and you have them on the defensive side of things, maybe you're looking at like a 5 or 6 win team because the defense can hold on a little bit more on the back end of this season here. And then, of course, again, if you have a better quarterback, maybe you're looking at another win or two there. So this is a Raiders team that I feel like is maybe a little bit better than their record shows. And we kind of got that from them fighting through these last few weeks here all the way to the very end. Yeah, kind of an ugly loss to the Chargers to wrap things up. But, I mean, these last couple of weeks watching them rattle off wins when people thought these were easy losses for them and for other teams to maybe pull off easy W's. I respect what they were doing at the tail end of this season. The Jets at 24. If this was Aaron Rodgers' last game, what a way to go out. 4 touchdowns, 274 yards. You hit the 500 career passing touchdown mark. Talk about just like utter disappointment and a big like what if. You have to wonder, at the very least, what this team maybe would have looked like last year, and it's probably not much better than what we got from last season if Aaron Rodgers doesn't tear his Achilles, but man, oh man, from the dysfunction to the organization to now the rumors that we have Woody Johnson's kids that are in their teenage years running this football team off of Madden stats. I mean, listen, I like Madden as much as the next guy. I grew up a gamer myself, so I mean, I get it. I enjoy the games, but we're not making decisions based off of what we're seeing in Madden here, and I don't think anyone who is actually invested in football would be doing such a thing, but at this point here, I don't know what fixes the Jets, because for my entire life, aside from the small run with Rex Ryan and Mark Sanchez at the helm, I guess in that 1 year, Brett Favre had the Jets competitive, which is one of those weird years that I feel like gets lost in my memory, but it did happen at one point. I remember Brett Favre on the cover of Madden in the Jets uniform after he had gotten traded, after he unretired. The Jets have been a disaster, and I don't really know what it's going to take to pull them out of here. It's so much so that the Jets tried to jump the gun and get the first interview on Mike Vrabel done, and that might have even cost them the possibility of bringing him in as their next head coach, because there is a piece of me, and not just me and other people I've talked to, that maybe feel like the Jets going and interviewing Mike Vrabel so quickly out of the gate sparked a fire under the Patriots, and they went, you know what? We can't just let Mike Vrabel go coach the Jets. And like, look at what we have going on here. Vrabel's obviously interested in the Patriots. It's been reported as such, so the Jets trying to be proactive might have shot them in the foot. I don't know what fixes this Jets team, but Jets fans, I feel for you. I do feel for you. The Panthers at 5-12. Listen, with Bryce Young getting benched and coming back, we have seen a bit of an up and down roller coaster here, but we have seen some real positive signs of growth out of Bryce Young during the tail end of the season. I mean, the Panthers had some competitive games towards the end where they should have been getting whacked by teams like the Chiefs and the Eagles. That first time they played the Bucs was obviously a lot closer than it was the second time around. But I mean, you're going up against a Falcons team that's fighting for a playoff spot. You're able to dump 44 points on them going through to win a football game that I don't think anyone really expected you to win here. But they did not go quietly into the night, and it feels like there was a lot to build off in that final month and some change to work with going into the offseason. I mean, you even hear it from ownership as well. It feels like they have their quarterback. So I'm interested to see what this Panthers team does going forward here. You had some really bright spots like Chuba Hubbard obviously earning himself a payday. You have some exciting prospects at wide receiver now as well with Leggett. So this is a team that's young, that has a lot of growing pains that it's going to need to go through, but it's a start. And to finish off the season with very tight losses, some convincing wins offensively, there's something positive to take from the end of this season. Like, you could be a lot of the teams that are above or below you, I guess, right now. Above you in the draft order, but below you in terms of standing. At number 22, the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, you want to just talk about hobbling to an ugly finish. I mean, if you weren't a 49ers fan, could you even really name off the starting 11 that they had on the offense for this team going into this game here? Like, it is what it is. What an awful season for the 49ers, finishing at 6-11. I believe they have the 11th pick in the draft this year. I mean, just not a season anyone anticipated, and I've had the 49ers fairly low for quite some time. And I remember when I started dipping San Francisco down to like that mid-teens area around like 14, 15, 16, I had people telling me I was nuts and I was crazy and just wait till this team gets healthy and gets back on track. And I've had them hovering around that area, and they're even obviously lower now as well. And I'm glad I kind of trusted my gut with that one here, because there was never a real feeling at any point to me that this 49ers team was going to turn it around. And that's not me to just rag on the 40. That's not, or I'm not trying to just rag on the 49ers here, but it was the feeling that I was getting from what was going on. And I mean, from the injuries to what kind of felt like borderline regression in some instances from Brock Purdy as well, there's definitely a lot of conversations that need to be had here. I think that the 49ers are best off extending Brock Purdy, but with some of the bad plays and decision-making and interceptions we were seeing, and you can point to the injuries and, who was he working with here, but those elite-level quarterbacks that are supposed to be getting those big paydays that, get those $50+ million a year contracts, at this point, if you're the 49ers going to Brock Purdy and saying, hey, 35, 40 million is probably more your ballpark, I wouldn't blame them if Brock Purdy said no and they opted to try to maybe franchise tag him and trade him away or move on, because there is valid evidence that he has regressed this season. And in a season where you kind of need your quarterback to step up and elevate guys around you when you're losing other key guys, you didn't really get it from Brock Purdy. So listen, we'll see what happens. But I ultimately think he does stick around in San Francisco, but it wouldn't surprise me to see conversations like that pop up as we go through this offseason now that he's contract extension eligible. The Cowboys right above them at 21, finishing the season at 7-10. I got to give the credit to the defense for keeping this game close here to the very end here for a team that has dealt with as much as they have this season here. The big thing that I really want to focus on is, and this is just one of those things that irks me about the Cowboys and Jerry Jones as a whole. You've got to be a serious trash human being to take a guy like Cooper Rush, who is working towards that deal or that boost bonus, whatever you want to call it, that's in his contract, where if he hits that 55% snap mark, he's going to get this massive incentive added into, as a payday for him, essentially, for suiting up, basically, and just playing the football game like he has been since your starter has gone down, and you basically rip that away from him and give the game to Trey Lance so you can avoid paying that bonus. Like, that's exactly how you don't build a good culture in your building, and is just another microcosm of what is exactly going wrong on that side of things for Dallas, and is why it will never be Dallas's year any longer, as long as Jerry Jones is the owner / GM / whatever it is he thinks he's doing over there, because he thinks he's the best MFer for that job. And as far as I'm concerned, Dallas has basically been, at best, a team that can flirt with a playoff spot, and at worst, a garbage football team. And Cowboys fans, I say that with love from me to you and insults to ownership and just how things are handled over there in Dallas, because this is a team that should be better off where it is, all things considered. And yes, great businessman, made it America's team, most popular franchise in the NFL. That's not winning you championships. The last time that the Cowboys won a Super Bowl, I think I was 2 months old. I believe, if I'm doing those dates correctly, I believe I was 2, maybe 3 months old. So that's how long it's been since any of that actually mattered. The Colts at number 20 to round out the group. Leave it to them to have to take Jacksonville all the way into overtime and kick a field goal to win in overtime ultimately, and still have to stop them on defense on top of that to be able to get the job done here. as I mentioned last week with the Colts and just basically everything that we heard from Pat McAfee following last week's debacle and just disgusting loss to the Giants, I agreed with everything he had to say there. This is a team that has been perpetually hanging around this like somewhere 500 mark as they've brought in basically past their prime quarterbacks to try and compete. And I don't really know what to make of this team. And until some changes get made from the top down, I don't really know where to go. I saw that clip of Jim Irsay leaving to go to the Colts locker room following the loss of that game. I didn't realize, like, I know I've been hearing things about his health. I didn't realize it was in the way that it is now, which is crazy to me because that's not how I pictured Jim Irsay growing up a Colts fan. But I've got to say, this is a team that is just in serious disarray, and I don't know what it's going to take to fix them because basically since Andrew Luck retired, which is where I've kind of since rescinded my diehard Colts fandom card, basically that night, this has been a team that's very hard to root for. Even when things look like they're going to go well, I've always been like, well, I'm excited, I guess, but I'll believe it when I see it. And that's basically been me every year, and I have yet to be disappointed by that thought process. I don't know. But out of all the negativity, Jonathan Taylor, freak of nature. I have to shout him out for this. 34 carries. He was literally every single run for the Colts in this game, 177 yards and a touchdown. He counted for every single rush this team had. That guy's a monster, and I'm glad he's at least an Indianapolis Colt. Moving into the Jeff Fisher category, the team's right around the 500 mark. Obviously, the Colts being left out of this category here because I think that's just how much they are struggling despite what their record is, and I feel like they kind of benefit from playing in the AFC South. At number 19, we're looking at the Miami Dolphins. At 18, the Falcons. At 17, the Cardinals. 16, the Seahawks. And at number 15, those Bengals. So the Dolphins at 19, going down as I anticipated here. The loss doesn't really surprise me. The cold temperature. You got Snoop Huntley at quarterback. Things did not look great, and that's one of those games where the final score was ultimately closer than what I think the actual game was. But I think the Tyreek Hill post-game comments are what are really going to start opening up some conversations about where this team actually is here. It sounds like, based off of whatever, everyone's reaction seems to be the same. It's that he's alluding to wanting to get out of Miami. And I just think that's kind of crazy because for what it's worth, to go somewhere like Miami because you wanted to take that big paycheck, and rightfully earned, don't get me wrong. Like Tyreek Hill, fantastic wide receiver, deserves all the money he's made and then some, honestly, more probably. But the reality is he left Kansas City, a perennial playoff, Super Bowl, and championship winning team. You went to another team for the paycheck, and now it seems like he's unhappy and upset with the situation he's in. But that is what you get when you leave those better teams. You're typically leaving one of the better teams because they can't pay you top dollar, so you go to a team that's worse off to get paid top dollar. And what has it gotten him? Missing the playoffs this year. Not reaching a Super Bowl since playing with Kansas City. Watching Kansas City win Super Bowls without him. So, with that being said, just an interesting kind of can of worms to just have popped open right as the season ends here. Like, obviously, the Tua and the hip thing is enough of a headache as a Dolphins fan, I would assume, as it is. But to have Tyreek Hill with those post-game comments, we'll see where this all goes. Falcons right above them at 8 and 9. If you can take anything positive away from this loss here, offensively, the future feels very bright. I am really shocked at the way the defense kind of fell apart in this game because I thought it was going to be a big reason why the Falcons would at least be fighting to the finish line, winning, and then maybe coming up short because Tampa Bay ultimately wins for that final playoff spot, or not the final playoff spot, but for that NFC South division title that would net them that playoff spot. But at least the offense looks like it might be good going down the line here. I mean, you got 357 yards of total offense and 4 touchdowns from Bijan Robinson and Drake London just between those two guys. Michael Penix throwing for over 300 yards. You have to wonder what this team could have looked like had Michael Penix maybe started playing just a few games sooner. I mean, with the tough stretch that you were getting from Kirk Cousins, and I understand there was a lot of money invested in him bringing over there, so I get why it took so long to move on from him, but if Michael Penix was given maybe 2 or 3 more games, maybe you win another match, what am I talking about, soccer here, a game or 2 that puts you in a position where losing this game wasn't going to be the end of your season here. But in the limited sample size we got from Penix and what he was able to do with Drake London, and on top of that, again, Bijan Robinson quietly having a monster sophomore campaign and only elevating himself further into the upper echelons of the running backs in the NFL. I'm excited for the offense. That defense, all the struggles kind of came back and then some against the Panthers team that literally had nothing to play for other than to just kind of give you a middle finger and move on with the end of the season. So tough way to finish here, but the future, at least offensively, looks bright for the Falcons. The Cardinals at 17 with nothing really to play for but pride, coming in and absolutely just dog walking, I guess is even putting it lightly, the San Francisco 49ers 47-24. Not what I expected from them. I expected a harder fought contest, but ultimately a win. But when you look at just where this Cardinals team is right now, even if it doesn't end necessarily where your hopes might have started to get when this team was, 6-4 or something like that and leading the NFC West, you're finishing up a season that had some highs, that had some lows, but even for someone like myself who called this one of the more talent-depleted rosters in the NFL, and I said that quite a bit this year, I did not expect the Cardinals to be sitting, doubling their wins from last season with 8 now. Plenty to look forward to next year. They just need to add more talent in my eyes. I really think that's all it is. I'm definitely not going to sit here and say they're the talent-depleted roster they were coming into the season. I have definitely changed my thoughts on that. They're definitely better than I thought. But if you add some more pieces in a few key areas, get yourself a premium edge rusher type of guy, listen, I enjoy Greg Dortch as much as the next guy, but if you can get a legit number 2 to the number 1 of Marvin Harrison Jr. and maybe get a legit complementary piece to the running back room so the ageless James Conner doesn't have to be running the running back room by himself, maybe you have yourself a literal playoff contending team. So, and they were in the thick of it till the very end. So I give the Cardinals some credit for that. Doubling up their wins this year, great step in the right direction, and I'm looking forward to seeing if they can improve going through this offseason and next year. The Seahawks at 16, finishing at 10-7, took a career-best 4 passing touchdowns from Geno Smith, but they did get the job done, hitting 10 wins, but ultimately missing the playoffs despite those 10 wins. It really is unfortunate that they were able to at least hit the tie, with splitting the series 1-1 with the Rams this year, and then ultimately missing the playoffs because of strength of schedule, tiebreakers and things like that. But that is how the cookie crumbles sometimes. I will say, this is a team, though, that coming away from this year 1 in the Mike McDonald era, I don't really think you can be that mad. Yeah, maybe it's disappointing because you were this close to potentially winning your division that first year with your rookie head coach, but this is a team that dealt with a ton of defensive injuries for a good portion of the season, and you have to wonder if that injury bug didn't bite them as hard as it did, and they had a healthier unit during that stretch of time that they were missing guys. This is a team that might even be looking at 11 or 12 wins, winning their division, and waiting for a playoff matchup next week. So fantastic first year. I don't really know how you could walk away from this disappointed. You still have a really good core group of guys. Yeah, there's some contracts that are coming up that need to be dealt with, but this is a team that I really think if the offensive line could get some improvement, because that's been a problem since well before Russell Wilson even left, if they could at least protect Geno Smith even slightly, this is a team that could really be pushing in the NFC, because the NFC is kind of all over the place right now, where, yeah, you have teams that are 13 or 14-3 or whatever it is the Eagles are right now. Mine's blanking on me right now. Where are they? 14-3 in the Eagles. You of course have the 15-2 Lions and the 14-3 Vikings, but the rest of the NFC is pretty tight, and this is a team that's not too far off from competing. Considering how close they got in year number 1 under Mike McDonald, the future feels very bright in Seattle. And then the Bengals rounding out the group here at number 15 here. When the Bengals needed when Joe Burrow rather needed the defense the most, he actually got some help from them. The turnover on downs to force the win in this game here. It's unfortunate that they could not make the playoffs, but when you look at the rest of the AFC playoff picture, I'm not really too mad at how the rest of that entire AFC picture looks. I mean, this is a defense that could not really do anything to back up an offense that was dumping near around like 30 points per game, it felt like, at the end of the season. And it's great that they showed up late, but it just a little bit too late. And you're in a position where you're going into the final week. You have to win your game. And then on top of that, you need to hope that in some way, somehow, the Chiefs would be interested in maybe winning a football game that would allow you to walk into the playoffs. It was a very, very far-fetched reality. I don't think it was ever something that was going to happen here. Kansas City, and we'll get into them in a second, didn't even look like they had even the slightest of interest of letting something like that happen. So it is what it is. You come up short. You are the best of the rest in my eyes that did not make the playoffs. So I know if you're not first, you're last in the NFL is basically how that works here, and moral victories kind of suck. But if this defense can just get right next year, and if the Bengals somehow, some way, find a way to avoid losing T. Higgins this offseason, really interested in what the Bengals could do next year. And on top of that, they need to find a legitimate pass rush that isn't just Trey Hendrickson, because it's insane to me how much that guy can do in terms of generating pressure and bringing down quarterbacks, and how the rest of his team feels like they're all playing with their hands tied behind their back. It's incredible, the one-man wrecking crew that Trey Hendrickson is. Now, the playoff teams. These are the playoff hopefuls, yes, but they are actually now the playoff teams within the NFL. So again, power rankings here, the way we've been doing this tier list, if this is your first time catching this is actual playoff teams. These were the hopefuls. The way it was broken down was always 7 AFC, 7 NFC. You had to have a division winner from all 8 divisions, and then 3 wild card teams from each conference. So, at number 14, Pittsburgh Steelers, man, and we'll talk about them in a second. Steelers right above them at 13, Broncos at 12, Bucks at 11, Chargers at 10, Rams at 9, Commanders at 8, Packers at 7, and the Vikings getting kicked out of the Super Bowl Contenders club with one hell of an ugly loss on Sunday Night Football. We will definitely get to that. The Steelers, though, the calls for a change at head coach are back. I've been hearing it in my own comment section from some of you. And on top of that, I've been reading it through social media as well. And it's the same old, and I get it. I really do. George Pickens, handful of drops, felt like he could not come up big in the moments where he usually has at many points throughout this season here. But the offense has been struggling for the last month to get anywhere, and with no more than 17 points scored in those last 4 games, Pittsburgh has a week to figure it out, and if they don't, they're looking at a one-and-done season again. And then at that point, listen, the crowd that might... it's very interesting watching Steelers fans discuss this, because with the way they seem to all talk about Mike Tomlin right now is you have the group that goes, we have been competitive every single year, not a single losing season. It's always been 500 or better with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're at least in the thick of it every single year. But there is that old saying of, insanity is doing something over and over and over again and expecting a different result. And this is kind of like we're getting into that conversation now at this point here, where it's been quite some time since the Steelers were actually a juggernaut Super Bowl contending team. Even in the years where they've had these really good records, there's always been some fatal flaws that were there and they wind up getting bounced. So I'll be curious to see what happens with the Steelers going into next week. That is one where I'm not really sure how I feel about their matchup yet and what they're going to be able to do. It's something I'm really going to look into this week, and I'm glad I get the extra day to really look at these playoff matchups with the games ending on Sunday instead of Monday this week. So this is a team to watch, because I don't know how safe Mike Tomlin's job actually is, despite the fact that they've never had a losing record under him, with another, 10-win season, you're barely squeaking into the playoffs, and if you get bounced the first round, I mean, it's like, the question of like, what are we doing here, I think is a very fair question to ask if you're a Steelers fan. Texans at 13, good way to get momentum back going into the playoffs here. Obviously, you're going up against a down-and-out division rival that has literally nothing but a first overall pick to potentially find themselves in if they lose to you. So, great way to get in there, get some momentum back for your team. C.J. Stroud looked fantastic that first drive there, as he should against that Titans team. Dameon Pierce, 176 yards on the ground, showed off the wheels on that 92-yard run. This is a great way to just kind of get yourself back into form, get a win in the column, and at least feel good going into the playoffs, because the Texans have kind of, stumbled their way towards the end of this season as well. And I'm sure that they're still, even with this win here, you don't get a loss where you're only putting up 2 points and the defense is allowing over 30 behind you very quickly. So this is one to at least kind of like get some of that sour taste out of your mouth. But again, a good victory that I think this team needed. The Broncos at 12, Bo Nix going 321 and 4 tutties against the Kansas City Chiefs. Granted, it was against a team that literally had no desire to really do anything aside from suit up for this game and have it be played because it needed to be played. The big highlight for me, though, was, of course, Devon Vele. That touchdown catch he had was absolutely insane. The double tip where it ended up in his hands and he wound up scoring in the back of the end zone was just, that's crazy. Like, you don't see stuff like that happen too often. And it's one of those catches that's like, kind of like catch of the year kind of category, because considering how unlikely that end result was, but because it was buried in a game like it was, where the season's kind of over, people are tuning out because the Chiefs have nothing to play for. Like, it got lost in a sea of a week that just did not really matter for a lot of these games, and in a game where it legitimately did not matter for one side of the game. It was basically the Broncos just needed to win, and you got 2 touchdowns in, and you went, oh, okay, the Chiefs are going to literally just let this happen here because they're looking towards the playoffs. So at this point right now, I'm excited that the Broncos made it, and for those of you that had all the mean things to say to Bo Nix about AARP and how old he was coming out of college, this is the comeuppance. I'm pretty happy that this happened for Bo Nix. This is a guy that I've been rooting for all year long, and I said this at the start of the season as well. This is a guy that I wanted to see. I feel like have I been saying this is a guy a lot? I'm sorry if I keep saying that, but that's definitely like the 4th or 5th time I've said this, and maybe not. Maybe it's more than that, but this is someone that I have been rooting for just because of the unnecessary amount of flack that he has caught from a lot of people, and all the people that were hating on him, saying that he was only as good as he was in college because he was 100 years old and he's a grown man playing against boys. It almost feels like that time he spent in college has paid off dividends for him now, because he has looked very good this season. So excited to see what the Broncos could potentially do here in year 1 with Bo Nix and in year 2 with head coach Sean Payton, and a defense that is pretty damn nasty too. Buccaneers at 11, sitting at 10-7, forcing the ball to Mike Evans for 1,000 yards. For him to hit his bonus, A, but also B, to keep his career streak alive with 11 straight seasons at 1,000 yards, is the polar opposite of what you saw from the Cowboys in Jerry Jones deciding that we were not going to see Cooper Rush get his bonus. So that is how you're supposed to handle things with an organization. Cowboys fans, I'm sorry you're catching a stray here, but the polar opposite of what we got on the opposite end from your team. Now, aside from that, the big thing for me here, I will say, it is insane to me, and now Cleveland fans, you're going to kind of catch strays here as well, not you specifically, but your team will. It is crazy to me that Baker Mayfield has brought the Buccaneers to now back-to-back playoff berths, and he already has a playoff win, and is now set to host another playoff game as he has won this division twice now since coming into Tampa Bay, that the Browns really opted to move on from him because he decided to play a season with a hurt shoulder when he probably shouldn't have been playing. This is like one of my favorite stories going in the NFL right now, and I'm almost positive that Baker Mayfield is somewhere giving the bird to the Cleveland Browns organization. I'm sure not the fans, but definitely the Browns organization. They did not deserve Baker Mayfield, and I'm happy to see him finding the success that he's having here. This is one of those stories where when you see the train wreck that Cleveland has put themselves in, just for the sake of trying to move on from somebody else for whatever that reason was. And again, I still to this day do not understand what the decision-making process was in that, because here he is, back-to-back division titles as the quarterback for Tampa Bay. Could not have got that more wrong in Cleveland. The Chargers at 10, Herbert racking up nearly 400 total yards of offense and a couple of touchdowns. They look like they're firing on all cylinders. Herbert's got his mojo back. J.K. Dobbins is in the backfield, so they're feeling really good there. Teams have to respect the run again now. Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston combined for over 280 yards on the night. Final seconds touchdown made this game closer than it actually was on the scoreboard for the Raiders. This is a team that is stomping a division rival and rolling into a playoff game, and I've got to say, Jim Harbaugh, year one, flipping the script, and a lot of people were saying this prior to at the end of last season, at the tail end of the Brandon Staley stuff. If we just had some good coaching, this could probably be a playoff team. For them to have stripped the team in areas the way they did, rebuild it back up, create a whole new identity. This is a rough and tough football team that I think is built for January football. Rams at number 9, sitting Stafford, Kupp, and Kyren Williams, still going down swinging to the Seattle Seahawks, but ultimately losing 30-25 with Jimmy Garoppolo at the helm. I will say that I wish that the Rams at least started their guys for a little bit here, because they could have taken the number 3 seed with the win. And listen, with the way the Vikings looked in this Sunday night football game now, you have to wonder. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because no team in the NFL, aside from like maybe the Vikings and the Broncos, brought as much pressure as the Rams did this year. And we saw just how ugly things got with Sam Darnold this Sunday night. If the Rams can do that too, there is a path and a window for them to win this game. I'm just surprised to see that the Rams didn't want to at least try to get themselves that number 3 seed and get a little bit more of a favorable matchup in the playoffs for them. But they were still competitive to the end. It was a close one. I'm that's the only thing I'm really questioning here. But Sean McVay, he's as good of a coach as they come. Obviously, two Super Bowl appearances, a Super Bowl win. I'm not going to sit here and say I know better than he does, but I just would have liked to see them at least attempt to capture that number 3 seed with their starting guys, and then maybe, halfway through shift over to backups if they wanted to. But it is what it is now. They're set to play the Minnesota Vikings. And honestly, the matchup isn't as bad as I thought it would potentially be prior to that game kicking off. Commanders at 8, 12-5 with Mariota, going 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Washington securing a game-winning drive to pull it off here. For me, when I look at Washington, a team that is just so far ahead of schedule here, it's very interesting and fun for me to look at them and then look at the Patriots, who picked literally 1 pick after them in last year's draft, and you get 2 polar opposite results. You get a team that has been through a lot with ownership, to the point where ownership had to be forced out of the way, and we're bringing in an entire new coaching regime. Like, a lot has changed in Washington over the last year, 2 years or so. But you saw a complete flip, bringing in a veteran head coach, drafting a rookie quarterback, bringing in a really smart offensive mind to be offensive coordinator. You spent a ton of money going after all these guys to make this roster better. They did a huge flip in Washington. And one of my biggest criticisms about them coming into this season was, were they going to be able to take this massive roster turnover, make them all gel into one cohesive unit, and be able to field a contending team, or even just like a competent football team, never mind a playoff contending team? And here they are, 12-5, with a record that in a season where unfortunately your division champion is sitting at 14-3, 12-5 is a division winning record. That wins a handful of divisions in the NFL this year alone. If they weren't in the NFC East, they're winning a division. You could look at the West, you could look at the South in the NFC. Like, the reality is you just had a really good division opponent this year, and that's why you're not winning a division. So this is a Commanders team that's in a really good spot right now. I'm really excited to see how they do. Jaden Daniels, in my opinion, is as real as they come. I know a lot of people keep saying, once they get the tape on him, and this will be the same thing this offseason that CJ Stroud got coming out of last year, going into this year. Once everyone has the tape on him, they'll figure him out next year. And I don't really even think that teams really figured out CJ Stroud this year. The reality is that wide receiver injuries and an offensive line that has regressed through basically the back half of the season has been really the bigger issue over there, and CJ Stroud's just kind of suffering because of it. This Commanders team is set up and primed for a good run for quite some time in my eyes. And the Packers at 7, Jordan Love pulled after an injury scare, but nearly beating Chicago anyways. Malik Willis, he's had to have earned himself at least a look somewhere at this point here with what he did, what feels like literally years ago, going back to the beginning of the season, and then what he got to do this week as well looked good again. 10 of 13, 136 yards. You have to think that he's going to be getting himself at least a look from one of these quarterback needy teams. Like, if he doesn't stay the backup in Green Bay, at least a look somewhere. Considering just how weak the quarterback draft class at least appears at this moment. So hats off to him. Excited to see what happens with him. The big issue, though, Christian Watson. That did not look good. Hoping for the best, kind of expecting the worst. Well, I guess we'll find out more tomorrow for me, but today for you guys when you're actually seeing this, because I'm recording this at 1:23 in the morning right now. But the Packers, not super worried about them right now after what we just saw with the Vikings. It feels like the NFC is very much the Lions conference as a whole, at least as things currently stand, unless you're a fan of the Eagles, which... I don't know. I've been juggling the Eagles and the Lions for quite a bit, but right now, the way the Packers stand, feisty team, but a tough injury blow to Christian Watson, and hopefully it was just precautionary with Jordan Love. I mean, I like them as like a feisty, scrappy team going to the playoffs, but playoff team at best. I don't know about Super Bowl contender. And then the Vikings at number 6. It kind of feels like we watched the Minnesota unravel in that game. And I mean, it just felt like Detroit got to them. That's the best and like simplest way that I could put that here. I mean, the pressure was absolutely on. Sam Darnold did not look comfortable. He was not making easy layup throws either. It felt like he couldn't hit the side of a barn at certain points during that game. And ultimately, the defense just finally breaking in the second half as the offense just... turning over on downs literally inside the 5-yard line, not going for field goals, missing field goals. It's just that tough way. Did they miss a field goal? Am I misremembering that? I don't know. It's been a long night. If I'm wrong on that, I'm wrong on that. So be it at this point here. I'm tired. But just overall, a tough game through and through. Not the game that I thought we were going to get to wrap up the season. This was supposed to be game of the year worthy, and the Vikings fell flat to the occasion here. And the NFC North now, and the entirety of the NFC for that matter, does run through Detroit, with them having the best record in the NFC. So tough look here, and I felt like it was necessary to bump them out of the Super Bowl contenders category, because getting dumpstered like that by a division rival that you're ultimately going to probably have to go through again should you meet them in the playoffs, not a great look at this point in the season. And then to wrap up the top 5 teams in the NFL, at number 5, we are looking at the Baltimore Ravens. At number 4, the Lions. At number 3, the Chiefs. At 2, the Bills. And at number 1, the Philadelphia Eagles. Not a ton of changing here, aside from the Vikings getting ousted. They were at number 4 last week, getting bumped down to number 6. So that bumps up the Ravens and the Lions a spot for each of them, respectively. The Ravens are primed and ready for a playoff run. Lamar looks good. Derrick Henry looks good. The defense has allowed over 200 yards passing just once in their last 7 games, and that was against the Los Angeles Chargers, and they only allowed 202 in that game. So the pass defense issues that were plaguing them the first half of the season, since Kyle Hamilton's position has changed a bit, this defense looks right. This team as a whole looks ready to go. The only issue now is just Zay Flowers and that sprained knee. Just how much is that going to bother him? Is it going to prevent him from playing next week? We'll have to see here. But overall, Ravens feel like a very complete team from top to bottom. The Lions at 15-2, but at number 4. Defensive injuries be damned, I guess. I will say I scared myself out of believing in the Detroit Lions for this game here. This was one that I have had the Lions over the Vikings basically all season long. And I finally let the noise get to me, and it happens to me every single week with like a pick or two where I sit there and I think about it for way too long and I flip-flop my pick. I had Detroit winning that game up until basically the buzzer where I decided to flip the pick before I made my actual predictions. I do it all the time. This is why I say don't listen to what I say when it comes to predictions. Like, yeah, I finished the year at 68% and some change, correct? But like there are games that I miss all the time that I can't even believe I miss. But the Lions, again, injuries be damned, does not matter. They weathered the storm with the first half interceptions from Jared Goff. I mean, the defense is really the highlight because by the time the second half rolled around, they basically just wear down the defense of Minnesota. And again, Minnesota's offensive failures led to the defense finally breaking. Things opened up. Jahmyr Gibbs got going. Jared Goff got more comfortable. And it is what it is. I mean, one of the big pros of the defense for Minnesota is being able to pin their ears back and just really get after quarterbacks. But the Lions are like, they're the kryptonite to that because they can ground and pound the football. And if they finally wear you down to that point where they're holding you and they're able to just run the football consistently until they finally start to break those runs, suddenly that aggressive pass rush doesn't really mean much. And you're sending guys maybe a little too aggressively, and you're getting running backs that are getting behind your guys, and it's leading to big runs, kind of like how we saw at the end of the game. So listen, the Lions are great. Don't get me wrong. I have them as it currently stands as the second best in the NFC just because of how high I am on the Eagles right now. But I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say that I would be surprised if the Lions are representing the NFC in the Super Bowl. Absolutely not. They are one of the best teams in the NFL right now, hence at number 4. But at this point right now, I mean, I still do have some concern about just those injuries eventually catching up with the Lions. But this was the litmus test for that defense, and they basically flipped all the doubters, 2 birds on that one. So we'll see. The Chiefs at number 3, 15-2. I forgot to update that in my notes. 15-2. They showed up to essentially make sure the Bengals didn't make the playoffs. That was their goal, and we saw that with the goose egg that they put up on the board, losing 38-0 to Denver. They basically suited up for that game to make sure they got it done, and that was about it. And honestly, I respect the hell out of that because the way it felt like the Bengals were putting it together here at the end of the season, that's a team that I don't think anyone wanted to catch in the playoffs because we've seen the way that they can play offensively and what they can do. So, listen, I don't blame them. I really don't. But I do feel like this team has rounded out at the perfect time. The offense has gotten healthy at the perfect time. They're going to get a week to rest and really recover after basically getting it this week as well. There is a piece of me that is a little bit concerned by that. I go back to, again, as a Colts fan, I go back to that 2008 season where they opted to basically rest their starters after going 14-0 for 2 weeks and then getting the bye week on top of that. Granted, that's 3 weeks to the Chiefs 2 here. But again, sometimes it feels like too much rest might not be good for you. But for a team that's been dealing with injuries the way they have, and also Patrick Mahomes' ankle, and just we don't know how healthy that ankle actually is. I'm sure he could use that time off. I hope that the rust does not affect the Chiefs here because we're on the cusp of potentially seeing history. And I know there's a lot of people not rooting for a Chiefs Super Bowl win again, but there is a piece of me just as a football fan and as an NFL fan and as a sports fan, I would love to see history selfishly and watch an NFL team three-peat on the Super Bowl. So I would just hope that the rust of taking this week and next week off doesn't wind up affecting them. The Bills right above them at number 2, sitting at 13-4. I've got to say, when Mike White went into that football game, it was clear to me that this team had no interest in winning that football game, and it literally felt like Mike White was purposely throwing passes either behind the line of scrimmage when you should not be throwing behind the line of scrimmage, and he was just throwing or overthrowing these wild passes. There is something diabolical, and I just respect the hell out of the Bills' willingness to blow this football game on purpose to prevent not only the Patriots from getting the number 1 overall pick in the draft, but costing them that, and maybe that adding just the tiny more bit of fuel to the fire that was necessary in getting Gerard Mayo fired, because he basically hurt the long-term investment of the Patriots. Even though you lost, kind of like a big W in the same sense. And then the Eagles at number 1 to wrap it up. The big highlight for me, Tanner McKee, a guy that I'm actually very interested in seeing how he plays out. Being an Andrew Luck fan, always excited to see what the next quarterback coming out of Stanford looks like. And for him to come in 6'6", big man here, 27-41, 269 yards and a couple of touchdowns, with Will Shipley and Kenneth Gainwell as your running back, and your leading receiver is literally Jahan Dotson, who was traded for, and I for some reason thought he wasn't even on the team anymore. I thought they got rid of him, but sure enough, he was still there. This is an Eagles team that's ready to go. I bet on the backup unit taking down a Giants team that was going to be trying to win. They ended up, when I say bet, I mean jokingly, just in terms of like the predictions I make every week. I don't actually sports gamble at all, but I picked on them to get the job done with their backups, expecting them to still be better than that Giants team, and they still were. They got the job done at home. Good win for them to go into the playoffs now, 14-3 on the season. But top to bottom, I do still look at Philadelphia as the most complete team in the NFL at this moment, hence why I have them at number 1. But those are my end-of-season power rankings. Last time we'll be doing it this year. We'll, of course, recap and react to the playoffs each and every week as we go through them. We'll, of course, still be making game predictions. We'll start to shift more towards like news coverage and things like that. Obviously, Black Monday is happening today. I'll probably have something out maybe Tuesday and or Wednesday regarding some of the big moves if anything else happens. Obviously, Gerard Mayo being the first domino to fall. So there's a lot going on with that there. So don't worry, we're not going anywhere. We are talking football all season long, as we are, or not all season, but all year long, I should say. It is all things football 24/7. We do not sleep on the Greeks gridiron. So I appreciate you all. As always, if you made it to the end, I will see you all next time. Have a good one.